So tonight I wanted to just say a few words informally, very brief words, and then we'll have, as usual, some open question answer. But I want to say something arising from what I observe when I meet with you one-on-one. Not just you, I'm talking about my experience meeting with many students in Doksan, what we call Sanzen. And it's interesting, there are certainly differences between different generations, but what I'm going to talk about is not generational. It's I think somewhat tied even to just our general culture in this era of history. And it's, well, there are a few points, but the first one I want to mention is I want you to beware of a kind of general societal trend of hyper-subjectivity or hyper-focus on one's subjective feelings. It's a very common conceit that what you feel or think, but I'm mostly talking about your feelings about something, your emotional state, how you feel about something or about a situation is actually important. It's a real conceit. I'm not saying you are unimportant. And I'm not saying that your feelings, perceptions, judgments, and so on have no use or value. But in general, 99% of the time, they're pretty worthless. Not just you, everyone, all of us, because we are so habitually self-referential in our ways of seeing. Habitually self-absorbed to begin with. That's the basic human delusion, the fixation on the false construct we call I or me. We are already enmeshed in that. And yet somehow in the way that human culture has developed, things seem to be set up in many ways to exacerbate that. You know, you're cut off from social units that we evolved in. You're no longer living as a hunter-gatherer in a small tribal unit where you know everyone and you have elders and mentors and younger people that you are helping to be a caregiver for, and you're tied into the community and responsible for helping to feed them or take whatever. You know, we evolved that way. Our brains, our bodies, our senses evolved for that kind of life. And now we live in a place, as is often said, where you probably don't even know who your next door neighbor is. So there are many things like that, many trends like that that cause us to be more inwardly focused on a much smaller arena, and sort of hyper-psychologized in our approach to things. This is the scene and the world that we're mostly focused on, because a lot of the other things outside of us we've been cut off from, or they no longer exist. For who here is, for example, your neighborhood church a communal center? In my parents' generation, it was. Many things like that. So the result of these trends, I'm not an anthropologist or a sociologist or anything like that, but we are all aware of the fact that we perhaps feel more isolated, cut off from community in ways that past generations have not. And with that also, of course, the rise of technology and the fact that we're really hyper-focused on our digital activities much more than human activities often. All of that seems to contribute to this trend I'm talking about of really doubling down on this conceit that your inward world, your perceptions, your feelings, your judgments, and so on are really, really important. And they're just not. So when you sit, when you practice, and you have emotion rising up, very common, as I said to one of, or at least a couple of you today, when you start to practice, whatever's just under the surface will start to bubble up. Okay? And somehow there is a growing sort of trend. It's even more so now than when I was in my 20s, in the 90s, doing this kind of training. It seems even more prevalent now. There's a growing trend for the practitioner, for the student to present that stuff to me and to really feel that it's of concern. You know, if it's a negative, afflictive emotional state, something unpleasant like sadness, anger, and so on, there's a real concern, and oftentimes there's a self-shaming and self-judging going on about it, that it's coming up. And I want to reassure you, It's just stuff. It's like swamp gas. You have an endless cesspool of samsaric experience within this body mind from endless lifetimes. That's from the Buddhist teaching standpoint. Of course, stuff is going to bubble up. This is a samsaric existence. It basically sucks. I'm not saying it's all unpleasant or there are not wonderful things in it. That's not the Buddhist teaching either. And you can enjoy those things. But life is hard. It's hard at least, if nothing else, even if you have the most ideal conditions, as you know, it's hard because it's transient. You're going to get sick, grow old, and die. Or in some order, you're going to die. Certainly, you may get old, but you're definitely going to get sick and die. And with that realization, of course, everything that we value and we get so attached to and we think is important and we spend so much time chasing after, we realize we should see very clearly none of this stuff is lasting or really ultimately important at all. Okay, so that's your situation. That's your existence. So you naturally are going to have some kind of feelings, negative feelings, sadness, frustration, fear, anger. If not from, as conditioning from things you've experienced, at least from the very situation you're in. It's normal. But from a practice standpoint, you don't have to worry about it at all. You don't have to do anything about it. You don't need to dissolve it. You don't need a remedy to it. You just go back to your method of practice. You don't suppress anything that arises. You certainly don't chase after anything that arises that's pleasant, because we're not talking only about afflictive sort of emotion and so on. Could be blissful things, could be feelings of great happiness. Anything can rise up in practice, according to the conditions, your karma, your body, mind, endless reasons. We don't have to chase after anything. We don't have to push anything away that's unpleasant. We just are aware of it and we go back to the method, whether that's the breath counting or the koan or whatever. You don't have to do any kind of, shadow work. You don't have to work with your stuff. You're not going to ultimately achieve any kind of lasting happiness at all. I'm sorry to tell you. That doesn't need to be your goal. There's a fundamental dis-ease in this existence. That's what the Buddha called dukkha. First noble truth, often translated as life is suffering. Suffering's an okay translation for that. Some people say it's not the best. It's actually not inaccurate. Doesn't mean all of life is suffering, but it's inherently present in everything. You cannot avoid it at all. Okay, so just realistically see that and understand that whatever is arising in you in practice, again, whether it's pleasant, unpleasant, it's not important. It's part and parcel of being a so-called sentient being with a body and mind. And when you practice, it all is right there in front of your face. It will bubble up endlessly. Now, I don't mean to downplay any kind of serious trauma you may have experienced. That will bubble up too, perhaps. It's possible. None of this is meant to denigrate you or make you feel that what you've experienced was, not important or something like that. I mean, some people have been through a lot of horrible things. That's samsara. If you have been fortunate enough not to, that's wonderful. You may still have it coming. You may have it coming suddenly without knowing. You're living in Kyiv as an office worker, and suddenly the bombs are dropping. We like to look at those things as, that's happening to those people over there. It's so horrible. Something coming to you too at some point. We don't know. Everything's uncertain. So again, I don't mean to say, what's happening to them, what they're feeling is not important. If something horrible has happened to you in the past, it's not important. We have great compassion for each other. But what I'm saying is your subjective sort of stuff that comes up as you're sitting it's not necessary to do anything about it, to fixate on it, to judge it, to do anything. You just go back to the count. And you include it. That's what's arising in your body-mind. It means you integrate it, you encompass it in the count. I'm really angry or really sad in any given moment as I exhale the count in Susoku-kan. Completely, one-pointedly, with great acceptance and openness and relaxation, utterly sad in that exhalation. And let it arise. We don't do anything with it. What you learn from the practice is that the state of mind we call samadhi, or that's the condition that comes out in our meditative techniques, is non-abiding in quality. What you start to cultivate is a mind which flows freely with the conditions but doesn't stick to any of them. So again, to sort of hyper-focus on your subjective stuff coming up and assume that it has worth, assume that something needs to be done with it, that it needs to be remedied or it needs to be held on to if it's good, whatever, or that ultimately it's important at all for your practice. It's a little bit of an error. And that should be freeing to you, in a way. Hey, you're normal. Whatever's arising, you're pretty normal. I don't care how horrible the stuff that you've experienced is and what's arising. From a human standpoint, normal. That stuff is coming up. There's nothing wrong with you. And the method can become like an anchor, like a rope that you're climbing hand over hand. The line of stability and clarity that you can start to establish through all that stuff. And with that, you may start to see actually where it's coming from. You may start to feel that it's dissolving. You may start to feel your body change as stuff you've held for a long time releases. You may even have a big chunk of that stuff just drop away. Because as you start to fixate less and less on I, me, where is there a place that stuff can stick to? You start to realize, eventually you realize, or experientially can give testament to the fact of your own nature, the fact that you are not an I and a me, but something much more boundless than that. Not with no limitations or boundaries, no inherent identity, and yet not non-existent. Where is the delusion, sadness, anger, whatever, to stick? You can include everything. I always tell people, whatever arises in your body and mind when you're sitting, roll it up into a ball and combust it in the furnace of your count. Burn it up in the furnace of your koan. That doesn't mean you push it away or destroy it. It means you be it. You be one with it. If it's hot outside, sweat completely. If it's cold, let the cold go through you. Be the cold. Be the heat. Join with it in your practice. And there's no suffering in that. Okay, so that's one thing. Again, it's kind of, it's a general cultural trend or societal trend of hyper-subjectivity, of attributing deep meaning and worth to everything one feels. And let that go. What a burden. You're not that important. I'm not that important. Most of what you feel is just normal human garbage. And you don't need to worry about it too much. And life is hard. So cut yourself some slack. If you're feeling stuff like that, don't judge yourself too much. With this kind of hyper self-referentiality also is a real focus on phenomena, a fascination with practice. Practice should be something that helps us to break our fixations, but if practice itself becomes the fixation, this is a problem. So there's a sort of a hyper-awareness or a real focus on, not just on the method you've been given, a simple method of breathing the count, simple method of focusing on the koan. The instructions are usually pretty simple. People have so much trouble just doing the instructions, they want to focus on, well, what's happening? I think I've got energy moving. I think the tanden is going boom, 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 boom. Today I was sitting and I felt like I was one with the room. Yeah, not that important. So what will I tell you almost all the time if you tell me something like that? Oh, Roshi, today I was sitting and I was really sad or depressed, but then suddenly I realized I was the universe. Go back to your count. Go back to the count. Go back to the koan. Don't push anything away. Don't seize on anything. Don't judge anything. What part of your mind is not doing the method that you're sitting aloof from it and watching yourself, watching your tanden, watching the universe, watching energetic movement, watching whatever? That's the part of you, when you're through the establishment of your mindfulness, your basic awareness, you notice that that's happened. That's the part of you that you should pull back in. It's the part of you which is not engaged in breathing the count, not engaged in holding the koan, or whatever the practice is you're doing. And it's very normal to split off like that. Again, that happens and you notice it, you bring it back. It happens and you notice it. Don't then indulge in judging yourself that you know that it happened. Oh, I'm not doing, part of you splits off and is watching you do the breath counting. Oh, that was a good breath. Oh, it feels like you got it. It feels like we got it. And then you notice you're doing that. Oh, shit. And now you're watching yourself watch yourself and judging that. I'm obviously speaking from deep experience. You know that, right? Just bring back into the breath counting, into the koan, into the method, into the chanting, into the eating, into the activity of samu, the work practice. Whatever it is you're doing, throw yourself, body and mind, into that. You think this is kind of a boring instruction, but I want to work on, Roshi, you wrote this book about all these tanden exercises, the secret teachings of Rinzai Zen, internal energetic cultivation. I want to focus on that stuff. I wrote in the book, you should first work on this and master that for a few years. Then work on this with a teacher. And the book doesn't substitute for a teacher. I laid that stuff out in the book, not so you could look through the table of contents, jump to the middle of the last section, this is what I really want to learn, and start to experiment with that. You get fascinated by practices, not understanding that none of them has any meaning or use at all except within the context of a comprehensive path. And the path has stages. The path has progression. Master, regain the basic fukushikukokyu, basic belly breathing, until you're doing it all the time, even in your sleep, unconsciously. It's how your body's engineered to breathe, so you can regain it pretty quickly. Then, start to do some basic tanden exercises. Then, like that. And even in the book it says that we don't try to do these in zazen. In zazen you're working on breath counting. In zazen you're working on the koan. But you work on the breathing methods outside of zazen, and slowly it will change your zazen. And then you will find eventually you're doing the tanden soku, tanden breathing in zazen. But most people, I don't know, maybe they don't read the whole book. Again, fascinated, especially by ideas of energy. Ki, tanden. You know what energy is. This is energy. This is energy. Your mind hearing my words is energy. If you like to use this word energy, there's nothing which is not that. So why be fascinated on some fantasy of some kind of energetic or light stuff moving through my body? The simple instructions are there for a reason. Do the breath counting with all of your might, as if every exhalation was their last on earth. With your whole body mind, you breathe the count, with the breath centered low in the body, in the zazen posture as best you can, without moving uncompromisingly. 1. If you did that even for 10 breaths, you would go fully, with a full commitment, you would go into such profound samadhi. Who needs to worry about tanden? Again, to this second point of mine, sort of fascination with phenomena. Fascination with practice as method rather than a real commitment to following the simple instructions that are the actual path to fruition of those methods. Count your breaths with all of your might. Work on the koan with all of your might. Whatever arises in your body and mind, any kind of phenomena, yeah, you're aware of it, okay, no problem, go back to the count. Nothing more, nothing more, nothing more. It's a fascination, a fixation, and ultimately comes back to a fascination with oneself. We make of practice another sort of fantasy activity that we get fixated on. All of these practice methods we have are so precious because of how they transform you. But they transform you if you use them in the correct way at the correct time, with the correct foundation. That's it. Otherwise, they can actually be harmful. But anyway, my point is not that. My point is your feelings, please don't anyone be insulted by this, but because I'm happy when you tell me stuff, but your feelings of energetic movement, your feelings of transformation, your feelings of stuff happening because of practice, when I hear that stuff, I want to say to you, utterly unimportant. Utterly unimportant. We know practice works, you don't need to tell me. Stuff happens. Go back to the method. Go back to the method which led to something happening. Because that's the most kind, direct advice to go forward and to deepen your practice most rapidly. But you find it boring. I don't know why. But again, it all seems to come back to sort of a hyper-subjectivity, a hyper-focus on what's going on in here. And just let it go. Your feelings, not so important. What happens during sitting, whatever you experience, not so important. Not important at all. I can tell from the sound of the Sanzen bell and the sound of your footsteps before you come in the room if there has been some kind of transformation or change. And it's not tied to what emotions you're feeling, whether you feel one with the universe or not, whether you're experiencing some kind of tanden energy. Tanden energy isn't something that you make through practice. Practice is a process of aligning the body-mind in a manner that there is nothing impeding a flow through you. It's always present. What you're seeking is always present. What we call energy is always present. Practice is the way to align with, become that. It's not something that moves around in your belly. I mean, this is just a tool, these kinds of things, these kinds of ideas. Anyway. I don't know how clear this talk was. I may be rambling a little bit, but I really want to stress to you the straightforward path, the mainstream of practice is follow the instructions of the method you're using. Sit in Zazen with all of your might at Sesshin. This is the place you can do that. You don't have to worry about anything else. Food is provided to you. You wake up when you're told to wake up. You go to sleep when you're told to go to sleep. You don't have to do or think anything. All you have is practice. And how creative you are to find ways to avoid doing that. You drug yourself with great effort, leaving your families, your work, some expense to get here, and here you are in the ideal place of practice. Don't be a person who sits in Zazen without doing Zen, who finds ways even then to avoid practice and to indulge in this sort of hyper-focus on I. What am I feeling? What am I experiencing? I'm so tired. My legs hurt so much. Or fascination, fixation, unpractice rather than doing practice. Energy, energy, energy. The mainstream of practice. Breathe the count with all your might. And the next breath, do it again. Or the koan, or whatever. When you're not sitting, throw yourself into that activity with all of your might. Enter into and learn to sustain the samadhi of practice, which will be the way to manifest the truth of all these methods that we have passed down to us. You will understand what is Tanden, what is Tanden Soku, what is an energetic cultivation in Rinzai Zen. But it takes the basic methods as its foundation. If you're thinking about your Tanden instead of the breath counting, that's a deviation. And if you're worried that the stuff you have bubbling up, which is a natural thing that happens during practice, means something's wrong or that you need to do something about it, you don't. You're normal, you're deluded like all of us. You have shit. Let it out. And go back to the breath. Go back to the count. Practice is really simple. We give you so many meticulously detailed practice instructions. All you have to do is really apply yourself to them. And you have to figure them out. I can explain how to do something like breath counting, Susoku-kan. You still got to find the way to do it. No one can learn that or make you learn that or do that learning for you. But you will. If you follow those instructions, it will come out for you. And you'll understand how useful a method it is to unify mind and body completely and start to experience this thing we call samadhi, and to have the breath start to cook and cultivate. All of that stuff will happen, I guarantee you, if you focus on just that. If you let go fascination, fixation on yourself, on phenomena, even on practice itself, on ideas of practice. This is a place where we do practice. It's real, this thing we call practice. I know most of you are lay people. You maybe don't sit as much as you like. You have busy lives. That's okay. I don't judge you any differently from the ordained people who live here full time. You can bring this practice to fruition completely in your daily life. And now here during Sesshin is an amazing opportunity to get to a new level, to dig in ways that you maybe can't do the rest of the year. Right? So please follow this advice if you can. Let go of everything, even your fascination with yourself, your worry about the stuff that's bubbling up. If you're lucky enough to have amazingly blissful stuff bubbling up, let that go too. Because it won't last. And it's not important. I'm not important. You are not important. And yet, you're Buddha, or you have the opportunity to actualize the highest potential of wisdom and compassion possible for any sentient being. That's your, I'm almost going to say birthright. That's your opportunity. And at the same time, we kind of suck. There's no conflict, it's all okay. Just don't take yourself so seriously. Stay a little light. Sesshin has a lot of humor, a lot of funny moments. There's a lot of ridiculous stuff that happens during Sesshin. And that's okay too, to enjoy those moments. I'm always laughing at you, so you can laugh at me, at each other. It's okay. With love, with compassion, with mutual support.